This here is a Commander deck tech about Ugge the Crown Scourge. But before we start with that, I want to tell you guys a story, and it's kind of like the story of how this deck came to be and like the conception of the deck. So, let me set the stage for you. The year is 2021. I'm on like basically a boarding school or whatever you want to call it, right? And on that boarding school I get into Magic, and I start playing Magic. The most recent set is Adventures in Forgotten Realm, which is a D&D set, which I've played D&D before, and I was pretty into it at the time. So of course I'm gonna buy some packs from that set. I got the Dragon Precon with Ronda's Relic of Ancients and started playing with that. And at some point during like the first couple of weeks where I played Magic, I owned this card here, Inferno of the Star Mounts. It's a 6 mana 6/6 dragon, legendary creature, so it could in theory have been a commander, but it's not really all that great as a commander, which we'll get into. It's also the reason why this deck isn't focused on this card, but this card is included in the 99. Basically, Inferno of the Star Mounts is a really interesting card. It's a 6 mana 6/6 as I mentioned before, it can't be countered and it has flying and haste, so it's a big beater. In addition to that, it has fire breathing, which basically means that you can pay 1 red mana to give the creature +1/+0 until end of turn. And that's really like, that's decent, it's not all that great, but it has a separate ability. When Inferno of the Star Mounts' power becomes 20 from fire breathing, like paying the mana cost, it deals 20 damage to any target. This of course can be used as removal, but it can also be used to deal 20 damage to an opponent's face, which you know that's pretty good. So like the ability isn't useless per se, it's just a bit hard to get up and running because you need 20 mana, and you can't just use mana rocks because like it needs to be 20 red mana. So like of course you can use stuff like Arcane Signet, but like when you get up in like the more expensive mana rocks, a lot of them are like actually just like non-colored mana, like colorless mana, and that kind of ruins it. Especially for a new player, Inferno of the Star Mounts it's a bit hard to build around unless you're like specifically that thing. But yeah, and that's where like Inferno of the Star Mounts was. It was a cool card that I put in some Dragons decks over the years, but like I never actually like built around Inferno of the Star Mounts. It was just like a big beater, and like if I happen to have like a crazy amount of mana, I don't think I've ever actually triggered its ability other than in this deck. So yeah, it's a cool card, but it isn't really all that great in most decks if you don't build around it. So that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to find a deck where Inferno of the Star Mounts would actually fit in. And now, around 4 years later, I finally made it. I've made a deck where I feel like this card actually shines. Again, you can use Inferno of the Star Mounts as a commander if you want to, but I don't really like playing Voltron and stuff like that. I feel like it's kind of boring. Also, like before we like move on, I know that Cloth can be like a good commander for this card because like it adds like a lot of red mana when you attack. But first of all, it's like really expensive. It's like $20, I think. And other than that, it's also like a really feast or famine commander. If like your commander gets removed, like if you're running Cloth, you're pretty much just done. You won't be able to generate a lot of mana, your commander will basically be dead, right? Whereas if Ugge gets removed, it sucks, but it's not like a big deal. You can still board wipe if you want to. So that's the difference between these two commanders, right? But if you want to do that, go ahead. But of course, this is a deck tech about Ugge the Crown Scourge. And Ugge is pretty interesting. What it does is it has flying, it's a 3 mana 5/4 legendary creature dragon, and it says Ugge the Crown Scourge can't attack unless you have 4 or more artifacts. This is a pretty like a fair restriction, I suppose, because of course it has pretty good stats for the cost. So of course it has some downside, but it also has a separate ability that's a pretty good upside, which is what we'll be building around in this video and also synergizing with Inferno of the Star Mounts. So, the second ability says, at the beginning of your end step, create a treasure token for each non-token creature that died this turn. It's important to note that it's just non-token creatures, so we won't be doing a lot of token generation in this deck, because it isn't really all that great, because we don't get treasure tokens from the tokens dying. Which is also why Ugge isn't actually all that popular for commander on EDH rig. So yeah, it's a pretty unpopular commander, but you've probably seen him before if you played against a lot of dragon decks, because he is pretty common. He's in some precons I know of, and yeah, other than that, he's just a pretty cheap dragon you can build around, or build with, of course. So yeah, this is the outline for the deck, and with that said, I think we'll go into the first kind of like small minor package we have for this deck. When building Ugge the Crown Scourge, there are a couple of things that you actually need. First of all, you are in mono red, so you're gonna need card draw, which is pretty important because this deck plays almost like a control deck basically, and then it swings in for a big finish with big dudes or other stuff, right? So we need some sort of card draw to keep us going, or at least like get some fuel early on, so we can actually like keep up with the opponents and make sure that they also run out of resources or won't be able to contest us. And to do that, we have a small card draw package that is bound to creatures, because as Gadrick says, whenever a non-token creature dies, we make a treasure. Or at the beginning of our instant, we make a treasure, but we make a treasure, right? And yeah, for that we have 3 separate cards that will actually help us make this. The first 2 cards I want to mention is Friendly Teddy and Ruined Servitor. These cards, that's the exact same, they are 2 mana 2/2s, artifact creatures, although they have different creature types. But yeah, basically when the creature dies, each player draws a card. This is a symmetrical effect, so that's kind of bad, but at the same time, we draw a card and we are in mono red, and we also make a treasure. And it's a pretty good play on turn 2, and perhaps even like later on if you're gonna throw a board wipe down either way. So these are like pretty good, and they do replace themselves as long as you have a board wipe, right? So yeah, and also the first 2 I wanted to get out of the way. Now the next 2 cards are like kind of a bit more interesting. The first one I want to mention here is Idol of Oblivion, and while this isn't a creature, it is continuous draw, so as long as we have removal, right? It says draw a card, activate only if you created a token this turn, and again, this deck doesn't really make all that many creature tokens, but as long as you have Gadrick in play and you remove something, you will create a treasure token, and then you can tap Idol of Oblivion to make a token. So that's pretty nice as well. And it will allow you to draw more than just one single card. So yeah. The next card is Humble Defector, which is a human rogue, and it's not an artifact, it's just a creature. This is a 2 mana 2/1, and for 1 red and 1 colorless, and it taps to draw 2 cards, and then target opponent gains control of Humble Defector. Activate only during your turn. Basically, Humble Defector is normally not nearly as good as it would be in this deck, because this deck runs a lot of board wipes and likes creatures dying. So what we can do is that we can tap Humble Defector, give an opponent control, draw 2 cards, give an opponent control of Humble Defector, and then we can throw a board wipe down, which will then in turn kill Humble Defector, so no one else gets to take advantage of the draw 2 cards. This is all really nice, and we can also, if we like have an opponent who's behind or something, we can throw a Humble Defector down, because we do want our opponents to like be able to throw creatures down as well, at least like a little bit, right? And yeah, we can throw Humble Defector down, tap it like on turn 3 where we are gonna play our commander anyways. And then on turn 4 we're gonna do some setup or something like that, and then you can make political deals to like, hey, you get control of the Defector, and then you give him back to me, and then I'll give him back to you or something like that. And then you can just, at some point, kill him if you want to with the board wipes, right? So yeah, also a pretty good card. And in most cases you won't be able to make political deals, because people might not want to make political deals with like the board wipe tribal deck. But yeah, at the very least this is 2 mana, draw 2 cards, and make a treasure token. So that's like pretty good, right? And yeah, and moving on to the next package, we have Minor Rocks are like actually pretty important for this deck. Sissy's Ring is like kind of the template. It's a 4 mana artifact that taps for 2 colorless mana, which again, this isn't like a great or anything. It's pretty decent of course, but like it's not anything special. But just like having a lot of mana is kind of essential to this deck, because we'll be playing a lot of X spells as well, which we'll get into a bit on like later on in the video. But yeah, Sissy's Ring is like kind of the default option here, and the template as I mentioned. But we have some that are like better, like strictly better, like Friend Dynamo, which just is the exact same card, but it taps for free, and Soul Ring, which is the exact same card, but it costs 1 mana. Other than that, we have like a total of 12 of these mana rocks. Some of the like worst ones include Solemn Simulacrum, which is like not exactly worse, but it's like kind of on par. It searches for a land when it comes in that enters tap, and then when it dies, you draw a card. Which like that's fine. It's a creature, so you also get a treasure token from the commander, so you do end up with 2 mana, but it's a bit slower than the other mana rocks, right? We also have Sculpting Steel, which in theory is one of the best cards. It can be any card, ooh. But yeah, it does require there to be something on the battlefield that they can copy before it's like actually good. Card that I think is like the best one in the deck, at least for the mana rocks, right, is the Eternity Elevator, which just costs 5 mana, but is a legendary artifact Spacecraft, which means that you can station it. And what it does is basically you can tap to add 3 colorless mana, so a Friend Dynamo for 5 mana instead, which is like not great, but it's fine. And then, if you have 20 charge counters on it, which you get by stationing it, which means you tap creatures and add their power as charge counters on the Eternity Elevator, and then when you have done that with like an amount of power that equals 20, you can add X mana of any color where X is the number of charge counters on the Eternity Elevator, which basically means that you add at least 20 red mana to your mana pool, which of course is pretty busted. Again, this deck is pretty weak to like artifact removal, but there are some ways to get around that. And yeah, Eternity Elevator is definitely one of the better cards in the deck, and it pairs really nicely with Inferno of the Star Mounts, because of course that only needs 14 red mana, and this gives 20 at the very least. And if you have other fire-breathing creatures out there, you can probably like pump this up to like insane amounts if you want to. But yeah, those are like the mana rocks, and you want to have like at least one or maybe even two of these in your opening hand, because they're just so good to like accelerate your game plan, and you're gonna fall behind if you don't have one of these in your opening hand. Now, the reason why we run this like 12 mana rocks for like 4 mana and above, right, is because we run a lot of X builds, and what I mean by that is that we run a lot of Earthquake-like effects. And if you don't know what Earthquake is, it is 1 red mana and X colorless mana to deal X damage to each creature without flying and each player. This of course means that you won't hit like any of your dragons that are flying, which like includes your commander, but you will hit like your opponent and stuff, hopefully, and you will hit stuff like Humble Defector and the Friendly Teddy and Ruined Servitor, right? So that's pretty nice, of course. And yeah, the hope is just that like your opponent plays a lot of creatures and you can just like board wipe them. Of course, I do recommend that you like actually tell the people you're playing against that you're basically like playing a board wipe tribal, just so they don't get like jump scared and like board wiped every other turn. So yeah, that is pretty important to do. Now, other than Earthquake, we have like a couple of different effects that are like pretty similar to it. We have Frontline, which is the exact same card, but it costs 1 more red mana, and it's an instant instead of a sorcery, so you can cast this on your opponent's turn and like threaten them like, hey, if you attack me, I'm frontlining your ass, so don't attack me, right? I've done that before and it works pretty well because like they know you have removal, like they know you have what's it called, like board wipes. And in a similar vein to Frontline, we have the exact same card in Magma Quake. Deals X damage to each creature without flying, but instead of dealing damage to players, it deals damage to planeswalkers, which most of the time is like strictly worse, but it does have some utility. We also have Molten Disaster, which I've actually won a game with before because it's just so goated. Molten Disaster is basically like, yeah, it's just the Earthquake for 1 additional red mana, but it also has Kicker, which basically just means that if you play 1 extra red mana, so if you pay 3 red mana and X, it has Split Second. And Split Second basically means that your opponent can't respond to this build. So for example, if you're gonna board wipe with Molten Disaster, they can't counterspell Molten Disaster because it has Split Second. And yeah, that's a pretty damn good effect to have on a card if you're pretty sure one of your opponents has a counterspell and you wanna get a board wipe out there. Now, the next two are like strictly worse options, but they are pretty funny. The first one I want to talk about is Torrent of Lava, because I just really like the artwork on this one. Like, it has like ostriches or something on the artwork, and like a big explosion of lava and stuff. So I don't know, man, I just like this artwork a lot. It costs 2 red mana at sorcery speed, and it deals X damage to each creature without flying. So already we have a strictly worse version of Earthquake for 1 additional mana, because this doesn't hit players, it only hits creatures without flying, and it costs 1 more. But it also gives each creature prevent 1 damage from this creature, or prevent 1 damage to this creature from Torrent of Lava. So yeah, they can tap their creatures to prevent 1 damage from Torrent of Lava, which of course means that it's basically you need to play 1 additional mana for this to like deal the same amount of damage as the other spell. So it's closer to like 3 red mana and just a bit worse. But it's a cool card nonetheless, and it does what it's supposed to in the deck. And you will most of the time have enough mana to like get most of the things anyways, it won't really matter all that much. Now, the next card is actually on the same rate as Torrent of Lava as far as I know. It is Jirari, the Earth of Flame, which is a legendary spirit from Kamigawa that has 3 red mana and X. You discard Jirari and it deals X damage to each creature without flying. So literally the exact same rate as Torrent of Lava, but instead of being a sorcery, it is in fact a legendary creature spirit, which is pretty cool. And yeah, those are like the main board wipes and the symmetrical board wipes that we run in the deck, but we of course also have like some board wipes that aren't symmetrical, because we do also need to hit flying opponents, and there's stuff like Blasphemous Act, for example, right, and Chain Reaction. And in those cases, you'd probably want to like wait with playing your Gadrak, because it doesn't actually check when the opponent's creatures dies. It only checks at the end step how many creatures have died this turn. So even if you, for example, board wipe, let's just say 10 creatures, and then afterwards in your second main phase you play a Gadrak, you will still be making 10 treasure tokens. Which of course is pretty nice, and that means that you can like sometimes hit the first 3 turns without doing anything, but it is what it is. If you're up against a flying opponent, it's pretty much necessary to like rely on those board wipes instead. Now, the next category of cards is the fire-breathing cards, and of course we've already covered Inferno of the Star Mountains, which was somewhat of an explanation for this deck, but there are a couple of other cards that I want to highlight. The first one is Fire-Breathing, which is where the mechanic gets its name from, and it's basically you pay 1 red mana and it's an enchantment creature, so it's an enchantment aura, an aura enchantment basically, right? And yeah, you play it on the creature, and then that creature gains pay 1 red mana to give it +1/+0, which is fire breathing, of course. Other than that card, we have a couple of other cards that I want to mention really quickly. The first one is Moonveil Dragon, which basically has, it doesn't actually have fire breathing, but it has an ability very similar to that. It basically has pay 1 red mana, and then each creature you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Which of course is just like you pay fire breathing for every single one of your creatures, but you only pay 1 mana per fire breathing. So that's pretty good, but it does cost 6 mana, so it's a bit on the pricey side. But of course, we are making a lot of treasures, we are playing a lot of mana rocks, so we should be able to get up there. Other cards I want to mention are Nesting Dragon. Nesting Dragon doesn't have fire breathing, but it does have flying and landfall. Whenever land is the battlefield under your control, create a 0/2 red dragon creature token with Defender, and when this creature dies, create a 2/2 red dragon creature token with flying and fire breathing. So basically, you play your Nesting Dragon, which is flying, then you get a lot of those small tokens down, and then you board wipe with one of the X spells I mentioned earlier that kills everything without flying. Your X gets destroyed, and you then make the 2/2 dragons with fire breathing and flying. And this basically means that you're able to get like a lot of, or at least like a good amount of flying attackers, and then like if one of them goes on block, because your opponent doesn't have enough blockers, well, you can just pump all of your mana into that one creature and do a huge amount of damage that way. Nesting Dragon isn't actually all that good in the deck, but in my opinion it is pretty funny, so yeah, that's why it's in there. Now, the other 3 cards here are like actually some of the like best cards in the deck, and I think we'll go with Dowsing Device as the first card. It is a 2 mana artifact that has whenever Dowsing Device or another artifact enters the battlefield under your control, up to 1 target creature you control gets +1/+0 and gains haste until end of turn. Then transform Dowsing Device if you control 4 more artifacts. Now, the first ability isn't actually all that great. It might seem good, like, first off, but not really, because most of your artifacts are gonna enter on your end step with Gadrak's ability, and at that point, +1/+0 and haste doesn't really do anything, because you've already been through your combat step. But of course, when you do have 4 more artifacts, and you trigger this ability, it will transform into Geode Grotto, which is basically a land, and it's a cave as well. Not that it matters all that much in this deck, but it has tap for 1 red mana, which is nice for fire breathing and stuff. But in addition to that, it has for 3 mana, you can tap it, and on the end of turn, target creature gains haste and gets +X/+0, where X is the number of artifacts you control. Activate only as a sorcery though. This is a pretty damn good ability that Geode Grotto has, and that's mostly just because we have a lot of artifacts pretty much all the time. It's a bit hard to use all of your artifacts, and yeah, this is just like, it's just like fire breathing, but a way better rate for like the mana, because you're gonna have like 10 treasure tokens or something like that, and you pay 3 mana and a creature gets +10/+0 and haste, which I don't need to tell you, that's pretty good. In addition to that, we have Chainsaw, which is also a 2 mana artifact, but this is an equipment which has equip 3, and when it enters, it deals 3 damage to up to 1 target creature. This can be good to like get some flying blockers out of the way if that's what you want, on just another creature. Whenever one or more creatures die, you put a ref counter on Chainsaw, which a lot of creatures will die, and this includes tokens in this case, because it doesn't really care if it's a token that dies, it just casts a creature that dies. And then a quick creature gets +X/+0, where X is the number of ref counters on Chainsaw, which of course is pretty good in a fire breathing deck, which is basically what this gives, like somewhat, right? And a board wipe deck, which is also what this deck is about. So a pretty good card in the deck. The last card I want to mention is probably one of the strongest in the deck. It's Hellcat Igniter. It is a 7-mana dragon. It is a 5/5 with flying and haste. And it has, for 2 mana, it gets +X+0 until end of turn, where X is the number of artifacts you control. And the important thing here is that, of course, this ability doesn't tap Hellcat Igniter, so you can activate this ability as much as you want if you have the mana for it. At the point you are going to play Hellcat Igniter, you probably have the mana to like activate this at least like 3 times. So it's gonna do like a crap ton of damage because like all of your treasures down on the board and stuff like that. So if you can get this through, it'll be pretty bad for your opponents. Like they're just gonna get hammered with like a 40 attack Hellcat Igniter or something like that. So yeah, pretty cool card. Of course, we do have the problem with them not being all that invasive, but there are a couple of cards that I'll cover that will help with that a bit. So yeah, on to the next package, which is basically just the stuff that didn't really fit in a specific package, but I still wanted to cover. So yeah. Now, I'm going to start out with Slowbite Goblin Tinkerer as the first card I want to cover. It's a legendary creature, a Goblin Artificer. It has sacrifice an artifact. Target artifact gains indestructible until end of turn. We have a couple of artifact creatures in the deck that want this ability because we can sacrifice our... what's it called? We can sacrifice our treasure basically, which is nice of course, and we can also sacrifice treasures to protect our mana rocks like the Eternity Elevator and all the other ones, because of course a mana rock for 4 mana is better than a singular treasure, at least in most cases. One of the cases where there maybe not be is because we have Magda Brazen Outlaw, and Magda is pretty interesting in this deck because she's not all that great, but we do need something to use our treasures on sometimes, and she can help us find one of our additional win cons. If you don't know what Magda does, basically you can sacrifice 5 treasures and find a dragon in your deck, and then put it onto the library. And the kinds of dragons that we want here are probably something like either one of the cards I mentioned earlier on, or it might be our alternative win con in case things go to shit and our opponents have like a crazy amount of flying blockers that we can't get rid of for some reason. We can find Hellkite Tyrant, which has flying and trample, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, gain control of all of the artifacts that the player controls. But in addition to that, it has at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 20 or more artifacts, you win the game. Now this isn't the main win con, and I don't think this is gonna be like actually like relevant for most games, but it is something that you can do in the deck, and you have a backup plan if things go wrong for some reason. For example, your commander gets removed or something like that, right? And you can't play him for whatever reason. You can go find the Hellkite Tyrant plan, and you might be able to pull off something there. Now we do also have a couple of other things I want to cover. The first one is Mana Geyser. It is a sorcery for 5 mana, and you add 1 red mana for each tapped land your opponent controls. Now this is great first of all because you can convert some of the colorless mana from your mana rocks into basically red mana, and because we're in a multiplayer format, this will most likely give you a lot more than just 5 mana. So pretty good card, and yeah, works really well with fire breathing as well as with the X spells. So yeah, nice card. The next card we have is Chris Gorgia, Forge Tyrant. It's a legendary creature dragon, which affinity for artifacts, which is nice because otherwise it costs 9 mana. Let's say you, for example, sacrifice an artifact for like 4 mana, which we have a lot of the rocks, of course. This would only cost 5 mana instead, which is a lot more bearable. And yeah, whenever Chris Gorgia attacks, which it has flying and haste, of course, you exile the 5 top cards of your library, and you may cast an artifact spell from among them this turn. If you do, it has affinity for artifacts. So yeah, just a way to get some more mana rocks onto the battlefield and maybe filter your deck a bit. So yeah, pretty nice card. The next card we have is also like some sort of card advantage, although this one is a bit risky. It is Nahiri's Lithoforming. That's a weird word. Okay, cool. For 2 mana, for 2 red mana and X colorless mana, it is a sorcery spell that says sacrifice X lands. You already know we're off to a good start here. For each land sacrificed this way, draw a card. You may play X additional lands this turn. Land you control into the battlefield tapped this turn. As some of you might have noticed, this is a really risky card. So yeah, do be a bit wary of like when you play this. You probably don't want to play this early game, of course. You just sacrifice all your land and like draw 3 cards or something like that. But yeah, you can play this like late game if you run out of source basically, and you have a lot of mana rocks and stuff like that. But in that case, you'll be even more vulnerable to removal, like artifact removal. So do be careful of like the kind of game state you're in and like what you think your opponents have. The other card I want to mention here is Jazz Emulating Inferno, which we have a couple of effects that are similar to this in the deck, as well as like of course other board wipes that hit flying creatures. But this one can be pretty good for like finishing games off as well if you have a lot of mana. It is a legendary sorcery, which means you can only cast it if you have a legendary creature in play or Planeswalker, but I don't have Planeswalkers in this deck, so it doesn't matter. But yeah, it costs 2 red mana and X, as a lot of the other spells in the deck, and it says basically Jazz Emulating Inferno deals X damage to each of up to 3 targets. Of course, you can use this in as removal in a pinch, but optimally you would use this to like finish out games if you get the chance, right? So like you tap all of your treasures and then different mana rocks and all of your land, and then you deal like, I don't know, like 20 damage to opponents or something like that, right? So yeah, pretty good card, and is able to close out games if you get the opportunity. Another card that is able to like completely close out games is Chandra's Ignition. Now I'm gonna be, I'm like sitting in real life with like my cards and like going through them, and like I've sorted them kind of so like I can see what I'm gonna do next. But Chandra's Ignition, I have like the Hatsune Miku secret layer in Japanese because that was cheaper, and yeah. So I'm just gonna like go off memory on what Chandra's Ignition does. It's a 5 mana spell, sorcery speed I believe, and it basically says, now I'm thinking hard, it is target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to each other creature and player. I believe that's what it does. And yeah, this card just goes crazy. Like you pretty much always have your Gadrock, which is 5 power most of the time, and yeah, that'll just clear the board and deal 5 damage to your opponents, which is nice, of course. This card does go kind of crazy with lifelink. Noxidon Warhammer is in the deck. It is not actually in the deck because of Miko's Spark, and that was a synergy I found out while playing the deck. So yeah, it gives +3 attack and trample and lifelink for 3 mana, and it equips for 3 mana as well. Yeah, basically the +3 attack and lifelink means that if you equip it to your commander, let's say, you will deal 8 damage to each creature with lifelink, and the last time I did this I got like over 75 life or something like that. So yeah, it's a pretty damn good card, and a pretty good combo. I also have another card in the land base that does give lifelink. I'll cover that in a bit. But the last 2 cards I want to mention here are Dinkerstaff and Burning Sands. And I'll cover Dinkerstaff first because you guys might know that. Whenever a creature is put into a graveyard for play, Dinkerstaff deals 2 damage to that creature's controller. This is kind of to punish the token decks which you don't match up against nearly as well and just get additional damage in, especially because like a lot of the X spells deal damage to us as well, so we want to deal more damage to our opponents than we do to ourselves, basically, right? And that Dinkerstaff helps with that because we don't really have all that many creatures, and the ones that we do are like big beaters most of the time, right? In addition to that, we also have Burning Sands, which has a similar effect. Whenever a creature is put into a graveyard for play, that creature's controller sacrifices a land. Yes, we are playing a land destruction. But yeah, Burning Sands isn't that great, to be honest. Like, of course, if an opponent is playing a creature deck, this can completely shut them out of the game, right? So like, this is a really strong attack card, but sometimes it'll literally just be a dead draw. So it's a bit like Feast or Famine, this card, but it is really fun. So yeah, if you want it in your deck, I'd recommend it because it can be fun to play against. Well, not play against, it's horrible to play against, I believe. But it is pretty fun to play, at least like 1 in like 20 games or something like that. It can be fun to play, right? So yeah, just a cool card in general. Now, the last couple of cards I want to get into here are the land base. So yeah, I got British there for some reason, Jesus Christ. But yeah, first off I want to mention I do run 21 mountains in the deck, which means that I have a good chunk of like other lands that are like just tech lands, and like utility lands I believe they're called, right? And yeah, I normally run around 38 lands. That's my recommendation for these kinds of decks that aren't really like big on lands, but you still, you know, want to draw your lands consistently because you need to get to 4 mana. So a bit of a higher land count isn't a bad thing in this deck, and you only really need like a couple of like board wipes, to be honest. So yeah, and then you can draw into the rest if you want to later on, right? So yeah, just get a decent amount of lands in the deck. It doesn't need to be like a crazy amount, but it shouldn't be like 34 or something like that. I've heard like, Jesus Christ. I don't think the deck is gonna function like that. But yeah, another thing to like keep in mind with the land base is that you do run a lot of fire breathing, which requires red mana. So have an appropriate amount of basic mountains or like stuff that taps for red mana in your deck. And yeah, if you're on a budget, there are a lot of good budget options for like utility lands. Stuff like Underdark Rift, which like taps for a colorless mana, costs 5 mana, and you can exile a or not, you can just put a creature under the top something cards of an opponent's library, basically, right? And I don't know how budget this is, but like just running like removal in your land base, even if it's not good removal, is like just great. As long as it just like taps for 1 colorless and doesn't come in tapped, it's completely fine. You can run that. That's like the completely valid land to run. Like genuinely, as long as it doesn't come into tapped and it taps for mana, it's fine. At least in a 1-colored deck, right? Then it's completely good. You don't want to run anything that comes in tap because that can completely mess up your game plan. Basically, it needs to be damn good if it comes in tapped at the very least, right? But yeah, that's the first card I wanted to mention. That's Underdark Rift. We also have some like a bit more synergistic pieces like Secluded Starforge, which taps 1 colorless mana, and you can pay 2 mana and taps Secluded Starforge to tap X untap artifacts you control, and then target creature gets +X/+O until end of turn. Activate only as a sorcery. This is like the main ability. You can also pay like 5 mana to make it a robot or something like that, but that doesn't really matter in the deck. But yeah, basically yeah, it's just like not really fire breathing, but it's like fire breathing adjacent effect on land that scales off the amount of artifacts, which you of course have a lot of artifacts in this deck. Another card is Rogue's Passage. It taps for 1 colorless, of course, and for 4 mana, target creature can't be blocked this turn, which of course is pretty nice, because your creatures normally don't have trample and other sources of evasion other than flying, so this might be necessary. So yeah, evasion pieces in your land base is good as well. Who would have thought? Some other lands that I run that you might like be a bit confused as to why I'm running these are Radiant Fountain and Adventurous Inn, and this is mostly because we do also run a lot of self-damage in these decks. If you don't know what these cards do, they basically enter the battlefield, you gain 2 life, and then you can tap for colorless, and these are like the exact same card, they just have different names. But yeah, gaining 2 life or like gaining 4 life if you play both of them, right? That's just like, it's a nice bonus effect, I feel like, and they're pretty cheap. So I recommend including these. Witch's Clinic is another card that's like basically just these guys on crack. So if you have that, include that, I think. Target commander gains life until end of turn. This of course is really nice because like that's 5 life, and with Channel Technician that's a like, crap ton of life. So yeah. We also have cards like Treasure Vault, which we're getting a bit more into like the recursion stuff now, or like Treasure Vault is more like to like save yourself from like an artifact wipe, basically, right? If an opponent plays like a Vandal Blast, for example, that destroys or would destroy all the artifacts, you can tap all of your artifacts for mana if you're able to, right? And have that mana floating, and then with the board wipe resolves, you can crack Treasure Vault and make Treasure Stone. That way, of course, you're still losing all of your artifacts, but you are like kind of saving your board state, at least like a little bit, right? So like I was editing in this, and then I like saw that like Treasure Vault is an artifact as well, so I don't actually think that you can do this in response to someone board wiping all of your artifacts, which means that this basically like uses a lot of its value. Like it's still somewhat usable to like make a lot of treasures if you like have a turn when you're not doing anything anyways, but like it does lose a lot of its value because it can't really save you for a board wipe as far as I know. If I'm wrong, do let me know in the comments, but yeah, I just wanted to pop in and say that. Back to the video. As for like actually real recursion pieces, I run Haven of the Spirit Dragon, which is a bit more on the expensive side, I believe. It taps for 1 mana, colorless, or 1 mana of any color, but only to cast dragon creature spells, which means red. The red mana is really all important because like we usually have enough mountains in the deck to get by, and otherwise where we want mana is in activated abilities such as fire breathing, which this one doesn't tap for red mana in that case. So yeah. Other than that, you can sacrifice it for 2 mana and return target dragon creature card or Ugge Planeswalker from your graveyard to your hand. We don't run any Ugge Planeswalkers in the deck, but returning a dragon from your graveyard to your hand is pretty nice. In a similar vein, we have Buried Ruin. It taps for colorless mana, and you can tap it for 2 mana and return target artifact from your graveyard to your hand. That's another like type we are looking to return. Like if we get off all of our mana rocks and something like that, we can like get one of the good ones back, like Eternity Elevator or Friend Dynamo and stuff like that. We also have Haunted Phonograph, taps for 1 colorless, and you can sacrifice it for 3 mana and return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. At random, of course. It says that in the text. So yeah, this is just a fun recursion piece, I feel like, because you like get to like take up all of the creatures and then shuffle them. And I don't know, that just seems like a fun like little mini game or something like that, I suppose. You can like pick a card, any card type shit, right? So yeah. The last card I wanted to mention for today is Borders Enclave. It taps for 1 colorless mana, and you can pay 3 mana and tap it to draw a card, but only if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, which of course, we first of all play a lot of big creatures, but we also have a 5 power commander in the command zone, which means it'll pretty much always be able to like draw you a card as long as you have the commander out, right? So yeah, those are pretty much like the different like card types that are in the deck. There were a lot of cards that I didn't cover in this video because I don't feel like either they don't fit nearly as good in the deck, because like some cards I weren't able to get, which I wanted, but I have the full deck list of like the actual in-paper deck on Mox Field in the description if you guys want to see that. So yeah, with all of that said, guys, I thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope I'll see you guys in the next video. And oh yeah, remember to like and subscribe, do all that good stuff, leave a comment if you want to see something else. I don't know what you leave a comment, like if you have a commander or something, I suppose you feel like it would be cool to build around, like similar vein, or like any cool ideas for upgrades to the deck. Leave that in the comment and like give advice to each other and to me, I suppose. But yeah, thanks so much for watching again, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.